Hello and welcome to the September edition of the IPM FAQ video series. My name is Matthew Gates. I'm an integrated pest management specialist and I have been for the last 10 years. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've mostly been focusing in the cannabis space. In this video series, I answer questions that people have left me on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And this is also, of course, on my YouTube channel Zenthanol, where I put most of my educational content about pest management in agricultural spheres. And if you're interested in that content, please take a look at it and let me know what you think in the comments. The first question comes from Ashley Varian on YouTube, who asks, "Hello, we watch your videos here in Southern Oregon for help with our cannabis crop. We have come across a bug that we cannot identify and needed your IPM help. We also have had a horrible time with russet mites this year and was wondering what the best product was for suppression. We have cleaned out plants and gotten rid of infected material and have also sprayed everything under the sun. We need your professional guidance." As far as the insect that they were having trouble with, it was actually a nymphal aureus minute pirate bug. Now, the minute pirate bugs are part of the Anthocoridae, which essentially means flower bug in Latin. And these flower bugs are considered to be beneficial because they're predatory and they normally feed on things like thrips, but they can also feed on other pest organisms. But the ones that they're often, or at least commercial species, are used for is usually things like thrips and other small little microarthropods. Now, one of the contexts about using biocontrol agents is that such biocontrol agents often don't afford the same level of quickness that a chemical compound can, like a suffocant or some sort of toxin for the target objective. Biocontrol agents are, of course, as many people have said in the past, much better in a prophylactic setting where you're utilizing them way before the pest problem occurs, but of course, most people are not dealing with that sort of situation when they have a problem like russet mites spring up. If you are going to use these biocontrol agents, I would highly recommend using a large bulk inundated release at first, and then also follow up with sachets, which are long release products that are available commercially in various commercial entities. So if you have that availability, I would much rather utilize that if it was up to me personally. A user whose handle I'm going to characterize as Ron E. Dog asks, "How important is a clean, biologically complete compost to our Living Soil and IPM program?" And when I asked for a definition of biologically complete compost in this particular context, Ronnie Dog responds that yes, tested compost containing plenty of beneficials such as bacteria and fungi, and as summed up by Catalyst Microbe Adventure, who is also a very interesting entity on Instagram and in the greater IPM sphere, they mean a compost with plenty of beneficial bacteria, fungi, protists, nematodes, and other microarthropods. So, how important is this? I would say it's very important if your context includes them. Of course, not everyone cultivates in this particular capacity, so it's kind of hard to say. It really depends on your context, which is the answer to a lot of these questions. It's a very common answer, but it's a very true answer. You are growing in this sort of way when you have a sort of soil microbiome that you're trying to cultivate. It is incredibly important that you know what's going into your microbiome area. I would say that in a living soil system context, a biologically complete compost is incredibly important. But what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that you're probably working from an ecosystem approach, a system that appreciates how various living organisms and their byproducts can help with the cultivation of plants. In what ways? Well, for those who don't know, you might have bioturbation effects by microarthropods and that sort of organism. Bioturbation is when you, it's turbation of the soil usually, so the sort of pedosphere, you could say, is upturned and cycled, and matter is moved from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top, and that sort of a thing, which can really help with, again, nutrient cycling. The other effects you might have are like various bioremediation effects, entoremediation, mycoremediation, bacterial remediation, These sorts of remediation efforts utilize various microorganisms to affect change in the rhizosphere, but also the greater pedosphere, and also the phyllosphere for that matter. But of course, from a compost perspective, we're mostly talking about the sort of terrestrial area, if you want to put it that way. To go into greater detail, the great advantage to using a system like this is that you are ostensibly choosing the microbes that you want to be in your cultivation space. And by choosing the microbes and microarthropods, you are able to have a level of control over this sort of ecosystem approach. And you might also be able to, in the same way that the prophylactic application of predatory biocontrol agents like Amblystia swirsky, like I mentioned in the last question, you can keep other pathogenic microbes out through various competition routes, because if you apply these microbes, then those microbes will not be able to colonize like the root system, for example. Mycorrhizae can create what are called, well, certain mycorrhizae anyways, Hartig nets, which are sort of a sheath of mycelium that will cover the root system and also extend outside of the root system. And the advantage to that is that it's a physical and also chemical barrier against various pathogens that might ingress into the plant through their root system. You can also try to apply specific bacteria that might even become endophytes into the plant and have various effects on the immune system through induced systemic response, as well as what we call SAR, systemically acquired resistance. So fungi and bacteria can have that effect. Many people who know me know that I like Beauveria bassiana, which is often an endophyte in many plants, and it does have this ISR SAR effect. Saltwater asks on Instagram, is there an oil I can rub on my body? So these cannabis aphids just slide off me. They're getting very annoying. Well, you might try some DEET or some neem-derived powders, for example. Just dust yourself off on the powder or on the compound, and just move right through the plants, and you shouldn't have any problems. You'll just leave a wake of destruction as you move across the plants. But to be honestly, cannabis aphids are pretty difficult to get rid of, and Saltwater does make a good point that I'd like to bring up here, even though it was a joke, and that's that foracy is a thing. I've mentioned foracy in the past, but foracy is the behavior whereby an organism uses another organism for transport. And when you're growing cannabis in particular, but also many other plants for that matter, you can be in a situation, especially with aphids, whereby as you move through the foliage, when it's dense, you might pick up, especially if you have hairs on your arms or on your shirt or in your hair, various microarthropods. Aphids being one of them, mites can be another one, and also for that matter microscopic organisms like various spores, and even organisms or like mycelial pieces and bacteria for that matter. So it is a very important thing to be cognizant of, and if you can find a way to keep yourself from moving insects and microbes and things that you don't want to move from one location to another, you need to be very cognizant of this. Maybe apply gloves or aprons or some sort of a cleaning system or an aerosol spray, that sort of a thing that can dislodge the organisms from your body. You might not be able to use an oil to rub on your body, and I'm not sure there's anything that's legal for that or that's approved in cultivation, but maybe that's a product that'll come down the line, who knows. Uncle Ricky's Sticky Icky asks on Instagram, what product do you recommend for a root drench for rice fruit aphids? In the past I've used Beauveria bassiana in root drench, and I've found it to be very effective. You have to be very careful with using other chemical compounds, obviously because they might be legal to be used in certain ways, or they might not be legal in your area, so you have to be aware of that. But Beauveria bassiana, being what it is, a biocontrol organism, you have less problems with that. There are various Bouverie Bassiana products. I don't recommend using like an emulsified solution, for example, or an oil-based solution when doing this. It's much more deleterious to the plant. But if you use spores in sort of a dry powder or some sort of granular formulation, that can be much more effective. That's the product that I like to use the most for that organism. Drohamid asks on Instagram, "What up, man? Any pointers would be appreciated. I think I got a lot down now, though. I found a fat ant next to the plants. I'm pretty sure the reason they come in so fast. So I got some DE to sprinkle around the plants and some Tanglefoot for the bases. My question is, what would be a good contact killer that actually works, and do systemic things work on them as well? And if so, which one of them too?" So when it comes to cannabis growing, systemic pesticides are very frowned upon, primarily because, well, for one, we don't really know what the residue time is going to be inside of the plant, and there's much too much problems with sort of guesstimating this, and certainly in most jurisdictions that I'm familiar with in the continental United States of America, as well as other parts of the world where it's actually legal to grow, which are not many, systemic pesticides are generally not allowed, so I wouldn't utilize anything like this. Although, to answer the question academically, yes, systemic pesticides do work, and it's the reason why a lot of people who were growing would utilize them, because they worked very well. And the reason they worked very well is because there was really no way to avoid them, and oftentimes they're a lot more noxious than your other sort of contact killers, like your oils and your sort of natural chemistries and that kind of a thing. It is true that many ants do guard aphids and other hemiptera, for that matter, your leaf hoppers, plant hoppers, that sort of a thing. And ants can have this capacity, but you really need to check with your crop scouting whether or not the ants are actually guarding the plants. I say this because there are very many kinds of ants, and not all of ants guard aphids, either loosely or strictly. Not all of them husband them directly or even move them, which is something people have observed in the past. To be honest, I wouldn't worry about it too much, although if you are seeing aphids in your greenhouse space, they can also cause other problems. Some ants are carpenter ants, as they're called, and they can actually harvest the woody aspects of cannabis plants, sort of the woody material of the stem. I've also even seen termites do this as well, so you got to be very careful when it comes to cannabis cultivation and ants. But if you haven't confirmed this yet, you should confirm it first, because it might not be as big of a problem. As far as diatomaceous earth, DE, and Tanglefoot for keeping the ants away, Tanglefoot works really well, but you do have a potential for phytotoxic effects sometimes with Tanglefoot with plants, so you should be careful when utilizing it. And diatomaceous earth does have a good effect against ants and other microarthropods, but it is not useful once it's been rehydrated. So diatomaceous earth is made from diatoms, that's where it comes from, that's where the name comes from. And these diatoms have a sort of a silicate exoskeleton, and it's been broken down. It's kind of like glass, so it fits into the different joints of a arthropod's exoskeleton, and that causes extreme problems for its ability to be ambulatory and therefore get back to the nest in the case of an ant. As far as contact killers are concerned, there are very many products you can utilize. For example, you can use Bouverie Bastiana, the entomopathogenic fungus I already mentioned in the last question, as well as various soybean oils, vegetable oils, peppermint oils, geraniol. There are many kinds of suffocants or contact killers that work because they use natural chemistries from plants, as well as sort of the oil base that either suffocates them or kills them through some sort of a chemical reaction or toxin reaction physiologically. But a small note about that, just because you've seen one kind of oil doesn't mean it's going to act in the same way, because these products, the devil in the details is that they have special formulations or different admixtures or fillers or inert ingredients that might enhance the effect of the active ingredients. And the way the active ingredients are being utilized can vary between products. So it's not necessarily appropriate to say that if you've used one kind of product, that's like peppermint oil, that another peppermint oil will necessarily work or not work. I have noticed that ladybugs, lady beetles, work great for bad bugs, and at high temps, 95 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, I assume. Question is, are there any other carnivore predatory bugs that also function in high heat? Maybe specific fly species, predatory wasps seem to not like high temperatures. Definitely there are, although at 100 degrees Fahrenheit you are running into some problems with potential issues with crop plants. Most plants don't do very well at such high temperatures, and cannabis is one of them. Although it can work well, and if you do irrigate appropriately, or if you have a particular cultivar that's heat resistant or drought resistant, this is also possible, although it's also very hard to kind of assess that about cannabis plants, especially those that are commercially viable, because a lot of the research hasn't really been done. Now, there are predatory wasps like the Peleistes, which are paper wasps, that I have a very fond appreciation for, because growing up there were many that would like to nest in the eaves of my house, and indeed many places they do this. I even found some that were nesting on banana leaves, on banana plants, because they were just able to do so, and a lot of them are tropical or subtropical species. But parasitoid wasps are very small, oftentimes, not always, but many of the commercial species are, like your trichogramma, your Ophidius, for example, your Incarcia, your Eretmoceras, Diglyphus. These sorts of parasitoid wasps are very small, and they can be sensitive to large changes in temperature, as well as UV index for that matter. The point about high heat is a good one to make, because as the temperature increases or decreases, you can run into a problem where the biocontrol agent might not be working at its optimal efficiency. This is also not accounting, for example, the amount that you're putting out, or the life stage, or a bunch of other factors like nutritional availability, or level of like hunger in the specific organism, that sort of a thing. There are many other factors to consider. I have a video that depicts the problems that can arise when a biocontrol agent is being used against a target organism in less than suitable environment, in particular at high temperature, where Staphylococcus punctillum, which is a lady beetle that feeds on two-spotted spider mite, was being utilized in a temperature where the spider mite was actually at its peak optimal temperature, which was higher and outside of the range of the, or rather, it was at a higher range than the Staphylococcus punctillum's like most beneficial temperature range.
That's quite big. Impressive. Ooh, that's kind of small. Yikes.
All-Star Clones on Instagram says, just subbed on YouTube. Excellent. And if you find that my educational information about integrated pest management has been useful for you, please subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what is interesting to you. Let me know if the information that I'm giving you is good, if you would like to know more information. It's the whole reason why I do this IPM FAQ video series in the first place. I really want to help people find out information, especially information that's been locked and sealed away in erudite texts or behind paywalls and that sort of a thing. People are literally dying of starvation, as well as other complications as cultivators, not just in cannabis, but also in many other food crops and ornamental crops. And I think it's just sort of unfair that people don't have access or good access to this information in many parts of the world, and even in the United States of America for that matter, where I mostly operate. So if you want to get that information, please follow me, tell me what I'm doing, tell me what you like, tell me what you dislike and what can be improved, and I'm sure that we'll have better information in the future. Hermetia Lucens on Instagram asks, we are very lucky to have you, Matthew. A question for a future Q&A. Hypothetically, if you had to work in a country where none of your regular modern third-party tools, exempli gratia, lab-grown predators, DNA-based ID, soil analysis, overnight shipping, and such were available to you, how would your IPM strategy change? And what tools would you bring with you to such a place to help you battle plant diseases and pests? It's a good question. I've actually had to work with people in this capacity before, so it's not something that's alien to me at all. It's a situation that plagues many people, in fact, and also in places where you might consider the modern third-party tools to be normally available, even in the United States of America, for example. So if you don't have access to insectaries or identification through DNA or through soil analysis, and you don't have shipping from other places outside of your country, then you do have a very limited suite of tools, but most of them are more low-tech and primitive, and it's kind of hard to talk about it too broadly and generally without knowing the particular context. But if I were to give some examples, I think could be useful. I have found that in situations where you don't have access to insectaries or DNA-based ID verification, it can be very difficult. Usually, and this is sort of a cop-out answer, but I'm going to bring it up in the beginning, you might have access to an extension agency that would have access to not the biocontrols necessarily, but to some of the laboratory equipment that you would need for identification. Certainly, certain pests and pathogens can only be identified through an entomologist or some sort of a microbiologist who is able to make that verification. In addition, I find that people in these cases have to rely on harsher, more aggressive strategies that are a little bit more primitive in that way, but they're things that have been worked or that have worked for a very long time. The unfortunate thing is that in a lot of other cases, people often have to rely even more on noxious chemical agents. And as much as I would like to say that it doesn't happen or that it happens very little, it actually happens quite a bit. And it's one of the major problems with food insecurity. There are also many places where they don't have access to this technology and the area is very rural. It might be often disrupted by political issues or some sort of a strife, and that can just further cause logistical issues in that way. If I was growing, for example, a crop and there was a pest organism like, for example, caterpillars, I might want to utilize more physical controls, which is something I advocate for regardless anyways, but utilizing things like netting, utilizing things like clearing techniques where you get rid of havens for pests. That's a very important thing to do in general, but it becomes so much more important in cases where you don't have a lot of options. If you are getting a pest like a fungal pathogen or a bacterial pathogen in the soil or in the leaves, it can be incredibly difficult to deal with, and in a lot of cases there really isn't a very good answer. You might have to just grow as much as you can and just simply destroy the plants that are infected or infested. Sometimes that's your only option if you don't have any of the other options that many people have already. Biocontrol agents, a safe chemistry that you can utilize. A lot of cases people are choosing between using a systemic noxious compound for their food crops or famine, and it's a very serious situation. As far as things that I would bring with me, it's very hard to say because a lot of these things are often not allowed, specifically and precisely because of legal issues, like they don't want to have a biocontrol agent potentially naturalize in the area and maybe disrupt the natural ecosystem. It's a legitimate problem. I've mentioned New Zealand and Australia before being very stringent in this case. Hawaii, for example, is also like this. So in this sort of situation, I would sum it up by saying that although it depends on the context, oftentimes there are many low-tech strategies that you can employ to sort of mitigate or excoriate pest populations. But in a lot of cases, the primary problem in these areas is that they don't have access to more sophisticated technology or strategies. They also often don't have very much support from their local government or educational institutions as well, which is why I brought up the extension specialist in the beginning, because that might not be available either. That's it for the 2020 September edition of the Integrated Pest Management Frequently Asked Questions video series. My name is Matthew Gates, and if you found this to be enjoyable and you have IPM questions of your own, please leave them in the comments. I also have a questionnaire on my YouTube channel Zenthanol where this video is produced. And if you have more questions, you can also reach out to me at Instagram as well as at Twitter. I have the same handles for both, which is at SyncAngel. And I look forward to your questions and comments, and I'm hoping that this is very useful and beneficial for those who watch. Also, if they are, please let me know in the comments, and any other things you'd like me to know. I really enjoy this series, and I'd like to see it get better and better every month. Thanks for watching.